being on Zoom, but I remember before we had moderators, I was like, letting people in. Ooh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
From Eretz Yisrael?
No, I'm here on Napa with my daughter for a couple of days, and I have my Women's Cantors Network in Portugal.
Easy, welcome.
Yes.
Shachianu.
Yes, for me too, a huge Shachianu. How are you?
Kutchuk's so beautiful.
Excuse me?
Kutchuk on Long Island?
Yeah, I've never been there. So
Oh, it's beautiful. I was just there 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, the conference is Monday, Thursday.
So nice. It's like the quiet side of the Hamptons. Wine country, very nice.
I'm so looking forward.
Everyone's like, how are you going
Good morning.
Yeah, but life is funny.
Joe, student. Pleasure.
That's Paul Simon, right?
Yeah, oh my God.
Oh, I know.
Unbelievable. Why is the one way to do it?
All right. All right, Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom Aleichem.
It would be really great. I really want to say that Paul, Amy, Sarah, friends, Theo, country people. Here we go. I really want to invite our Zoomagoggers. Hi, Zoomagoggers. Can you hear us? Are we good?
Yeah.
Shalom, wherever you are. Ooh, Ilana, look, I haven't seen Ilana in a long time. Baruch Hashem. There's a Yofi. I would love to see faces. I know, but it's like, we hear from the Zoomagog, we're in the room, we're with you. And it's like, great, but all of you are sitting in your pajamas or, and we're over here. So come on, like put on the camera, show up, I know. Not judgy, I'm not wagging your finger, just saying, it would nice to see your faces also, it would be beautiful. You got it, I see Debbie, yeah, I got it, okay, great.
Hey, Neil.
All right, sweet people, let's start, let's do it. Zoe, Eden's gonna put the blessing for Torah up on the screen, and we're also gonna bring into the Zoomagog and into the Roomagog, anyone who is on your mind and heart who we're dedicating today's learning to as well. You can just do that internally. And let's make the blessing over Torah. We get a blessing over Torah. That's like as good as it gets.
Amen.
Right? It's as good as it gets to have a blessing over Torah. All right. But before we start, I just have to give somebody I love a hug. So I just want to say, before we start, that last week was a significant week for our friend Thomas, because he spent a lot of time delving into the depths of last week's Torah portion. And in my haze of 2 jobs and craziness and all kinds of, he had prepared a beautiful, beautiful Dvar Torah, which only Thomas can do. Anybody who's studied here for 5 minutes knows that Thomas is like, just listening to Thomas speak is a blessing. And so I'm hoping that at some point he'll share those words at some point with us, because those words came from the depths of his heart, and it was a moment that I unfortunately missed, and it was my mistake. And I'm hoping that, God willing, we'll be able to hear those words that came from the depths of his own learning and yearning. So let's start. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Amen.
Amen.
Yes. All right, more sheets there. Let's do.
What does kvetching mean?
What? Yeah, exactly. Are you kvetching about that word, kvetching? All right, let's do a little learning on this remarkable and really interesting chapter 11. Ba'alotcha is a very. Let me guess. It's going to have the view on double pages. Let's see. It's the standard. Okay, great. Now I got to do that again. Okay. Chapter 11 is a remarkable chapter in a remarkable parsha. The parsha begins at chapter 8, so it's a long parsha. Balascha is like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It has in it, let's just look at the scope of this parsha and the way the rabbis constructed. Again, the rabbis are the ones who cut the, as it were, the cake of each book, right? So like each slice, not every slice is equally, right? So some bigger portions and some are smaller portions. Literally, so this parsha is a big parsha. It has in it, it starts with the menorah, the lighting of the menorah, the candelabrum that was in the temple. It has in it the Levi'im and the sanctification of the Levi'im and the Levites in the temple. It has in it the way that the Israelites traveled at the beginning of their traveling and moving away from Har Sinai, Mount Sinai. They traveled by day with a cloud and by night with a fire that showed them the way. It has the very famous 2 verses that are used in our liturgy, and it was when the ark traveled by Ibn Soha Aaron, and those strange orthographic notations, what are known as the inverted nuns, or the backwards nuns, like these strange nuns that are placed in the Torah, one before by Ibn Soha and one after the second verse of Unuchal Yomar. Very strange that even the Gemara says that actually those 2 verses are a sefer b'fnei atzma, that it's its own book of the Torah. So the Torah comes out to 7 instead of 5 books of Moses, because if you, from the beginning of Numbers until those verses, then from there after, so it becomes a fascinating part of the Torah portion. And then there is the chapter 11, which is this strange incident of the Mit-Onanim, it's called, the Kvetchers. And that's what we're going to look at, because it has in it also some imagery that I'm kind of wanting to explore with you and see where you all go. We'll look at some rabbinic statements, but just the reading of the text in a very particular way will give us, I hope, some no pun intended, but some food for thought. So let's look at this. Verse 1 in chapter 11, source 1, okay? And if there's got to be a way to put that somewhere. All right. Mit-onenim is a word that is translated here as complaining bitterly, but it really comes from the word to grieve. It was as if they were in a state of grief. And the word ke is the letter ke, the prefix chaf, is a similitude. It's as if. Right? They weren't actually onenim. Onen means to be in a state of grief. In Jewish law, the period from the time someone passes away until they're actually buried is called oninut. It's a period of limbo, when you're not expected to be observant of anything. In particular, you're not obligated by any Jewish law. You're kind of set free to be in the space of liminality and limbo. So mit onein has that resonance. And so the people were like as if grieving, and their grief was Rabbe Oznei Adonai. It was evil in the ears of God, and God heard, and God got angry. Vaychar apo vaytivar eish Adonai, and there was a fire that broke out, or a burning fire was blazing them. Vatochal b'ktzei machane, and it ate or it consumed in the periphery or the outskirts of the camp. Vayitzak ha'am el Moshe vayitpalel Moshe el Adonai vatishka eish. The people called out to Moshe, and Moshe prayed to God, and the fire abated. Vayikra Shem ha'makom ahu Taveira, and the name of that place was called Taveira, from the word burning, the burning place. Ki varavam eish Adonai, for there had been a fire that was burning. That's the first moment of chapter 11. Got it? Mm-hmm. Let's hold that image. It's an interesting image. It doesn't, we're not told that anything came from that. It's just like, oh, a little scene that happened. There's no lesson. Just like there was a fire. They were mit-onenim. Next scene 2, verse 4. Ve'asafsuf asher b'kirbo. This great word, asafsuf. It's like a, where does it come from? It's kind of like the word sof means to gather in, but it's a strange Hebrew word, asafsuf. You can even hear in it kind of like a repetition of a sound that means something almost twice. Like tzimtzum is twice tzimtzum. It's like a doubling, an intensification of the word asafsuf, le'asof, right? So the asafsuf, whom riffraff is a great translation of that, because it captures the alliterative and incantational like the F there is like asafsuf, riffraff. This riffraff asher that was in their midst, hitavu ta'ava, they have a craving. They crave the craving. Vayashuvu vayivku, and they sit, or they something. They sit down and they cry. Gam b'nei Israel, also, and then everybody, including all the children of Israel, not just these Asaf Suf, they're all crying. Vayamru, when they say out loud, Mi achilenu basar, who will feed us meat? Zacharnu daga shenuchal b'mitzrayim chinam. We remember the daga that in verse 5. We remember the fish that we ate for free in Egypt. Free fish. Et hakishuim v'tavetichim. We remember like the gourds and the leeks and the melons, right? The chatzir v'tabitzalim v'tashumim. We remember like the onions and the garlic. And now v'ata verse 6. Nafshenu yivesha. Now our souls, our bodies are dry. Ain kol, there's nothing. Right? Ain kol bilti, there's nothing except the el haman einin, or our eyes are turned towards this man, which had appeared in chapter 16 in Exodus, right? So 2 books ago, right, they've been living on man. They could just get in the army rations, and they're like, we're bored. Can we have some of that meat, please? It's interesting that they say who's going to feed us meat, and then they don't mention the meat that they had in Egypt. All they say is, we remember the fish, right? Remember, like, okay, but so who's going to feed us fish, right? But why they say the meat? So the Kedushas Levi, the B'ditchever says, and I think it's a very cute thing. It's not. I don't think, he says, of course they're not complaining for the meat because for those things they remember those things, and the man is any taste it can be, so they can have their man taste like fish, but. Because they didn't have kosher shechita yet in Egypt, now it's the first time they can have kosher meat. They say, who's going to feed us kosher meat? And we want to have that taste. We can't imagine something we've never tasted before. That would be his taich. I don't think that's the simple meaning here. But anyway, it's a strange series of complaints, and it points to something. If my mouse will help me move here, which is not. There you go. Right, verse 7, V'haman, what is the man? Kizera Gad, or Kizra Gad. Ve'eno ke'ein habadolach. This is verse 7, where it says the man basically is a coriander, it's like a coriander seed. Its color was like bdellium, right? So, just a little parenthetical remark on what they looked like. And what did they do with that man in verse 8? Shatua amblak, 2, they would go out and gather in the man, and they would then grind it in a I guess with a millstone. We have like a little public service announcement about how they used to cook and prepare the man. They used to pound it in a mortar, or they would boil it in a pot, and they would make it into cakes. And then this great line in the end of verse 8 that I underlined, Vayata'amo, and its taste, kitam, was like the taste of leshad hashamen. Leshad hashamen. It tasted like rich cream. We're going to come back to that in a second. Uveredet hatal. This is a phrase. This verse 9. Rabbi Koloresis and I just stayed on this verse for a while yesterday. When the tal, which is dew, would come down in the morning in the evening onto the camp, the man, right, would ride on the dew.
So beautiful.
Right? Yered haman alav. Like the dew would come down every evening, and so that we'd wake up and there would be dew on the ground, and this man business, this coriander bdellium, rich creamy thing would kind of be riding. It's like the word; it would descend on it. It's really profound. It's like a beautiful image. Vayishma Moshe ta'am bochel mishpechotav, in verse 10, and Moshe heard the people crying in their families, like by their tribe, by their family. Each lefetach olo, each person at the opening to the tent. Vayichar af Adonai ma'od, and God again was angry. His nostrils flared. Uveinei Moshe ra, and in the eyes of Moshe also something not skillful was happening. And now in verse 11 we have a very strange moment. Vayomer Moshe el Adonai, Moshe says to God, Lama hare'ot lavdecha. Moshe makes it about himself. He says, why have you dealt evilly with me, your servant? Lama lo matzati chen beinecha. Why have I not found favor in your eyes? Lasum et masa kol hamazeh alai, that you place the burden of this entire people on me. Right? Then he says, right, you'll follow in the English because I have to turn the page. Maybe I'll just read it in Hebrew here. He says, Ha'anochi hariti kol hamazeh. Did I produce all these people? It really means, did I birth these people? Did I birth these people? Was I pregnant with these people? Did I birth them? Were they my children? That you tell me to carry them in my bosom? As if like a wet servant, the way that a wet servant, right, would carry a child in their breast, in their bosom, on this land that you have promised to their ancestors. Me'ayin basari says, where am I going to get meat from? Where am I getting meat from? I'm trying to move it, trust me. There you go. The mouse doesn't behave. Okay. Where am I going to get meat from? Verse 13. Me'ayin basar. Ki yivku alai lemor t'nala basar v'nochel, that they're crying on me, right? Give us meat and so that we might eat. Lo uchal, and then he says in verse 14, Lo uchal anochi levadi laseit kol hamazeh ki chaved mimeni. I can't carry this whole people by myself. It's too heavy for me. V'im kacha atoseli hargeni naharogi matzati chen beinecha ba'al rebe be'arati. He says, if this is the way you're going to treat me, then please kill me. So kill me.
Every mother says
Yeah,
that.
he's like, kill me.
When
Right?
the children fetch, what does the mother say?
It's like, kill me now. Kill me now.
Kill me now.
And it's one of 3 prophets in the Torah that say this, right? Job also says it, but he's not a prophet. And he says, like, Yonah said it, and Jeremiah said, please kill, I'm done. Like, it's too much. And he uses the same term. He says, you haven't dealt with me favorably, but if you are going to deal with it, and if this is the way it's going to be, put me out of my misery. Right? If this is the way it's going to be, put me out of my misery. That's it. We're done. He says, I can't do it. So God says to him in verse 16, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Esfa li shiv'im ish miziknei Yisrael. Now this word has already appeared in some form. This is the 3rd appearance of this word. And now, right, do you remember when we started this whole piece, there was a group of stragglers called Riffraff. What were they called? They're Erev Rav, right, maybe, but they're called Asaf Suf here, the stragglers. And now Moshe is told, gather in Esfali Shiv'im Ish. So God says, you know what? I won't make you do this alone. Take 70 elders, Kihem Ziknei Am B'Shot Rav, and make them, right, set them up in the tent of meeting, and I will come down, V'dibarti Imach on verse 17. This is very frustrating. He says, I'll come down in verse 17, and I'll give from my spirit, the atzalti, I will, from the word atzilut, I will emanate, or I will impart from my spirit on that you have, and I'll give it to them, and then they can carry it with you. And you won't have to carry this alone. And say to the people, be ready. And then this is a hard part of chapter 11. And then say to the people, be ready tomorrow. Sanctify yourselves. You will eat meat. It says, because you said in the ears of God, who's going to feed us meat? In verse 18, it was better for us in Egypt, and God will give you meat and you'll eat. And then God says this, and this is like, we all pedagogically, this is not exactly God's best moment, but maybe, who knows? Certainly, I think many people might be familiar with this pedagogy. It says, not one day you're going to eat, not 2 days, not 5 days, not even 10 or 20 days, 30 days. Verse 20, Ad chodesh yamin, Ad asher yetzei me'apchem, until it comes out of your noses. This is in the Bible. You're going to have meat coming out of your noses. It will be for you, this is an interesting verse 20, it will be for you, it'll be loathsome to you, Yanki ma'astem et Adonai, asher b'kevechem, you have rejected God, who is in your midst, crying in front of God, saying, why did we leave Egypt? So God's having a God moment here.
Why does God do this, do you think?
We'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
And then in the last scene, if this mouse would behave, we'd be in the last scene already and finished with it. But the last scene, So Moshe then says to God, I have 600,000 people with me, and you're telling me I'm going to give them meat, and they're going to eat for a month? Now Moshe's focused on the logistics of it. How am I going to make this happen? And so then he says to him, right, in verse 22, am I gonna slaughter cattle for them and find it for them? And what about if I would get all of the fish of the sea, and I gather them in, right? How am I gonna do this? This is a great God moment. God says, do I have short arms? Am I lacking resources? You will see, right? Your faith also is remarkable. You'll see, what I'm going to do, right? And then the last scenes here are also interesting. And Moses goes out to the people. He says to them, right? He does exactly what God said, and then he brings together. He takes the 70 people in verse 24, and he stands them around the tent. And at that moment, God comes down in a cloud, and God does what God said, and God gives his spirit to the 70 elders. And then when the spirit rested on them in the end of verse 25, they began to prophesy, and they could not stop. And by Arushni and Hashim B'Machaneh, there were two people who stayed in the camp. One's name was Eldad, and the other's name was Medad. In verse 26, Vatanach Aleim Ruach, he says, and the spirit also descended on them. Right, the Hema Baktuvim, and they are in there. You can find out where they are. They're written down in the annals of Jewish history. They didn't leave their tents, and they're in the middle of the camp, and they are prophesying. These two cats, Eldad and Medad, are taking the energy that was given over to the 70. That God said, take these 70, give them energy. But there's two other guys, Eldad and Medad, and they're also prophesying. And they're like, it's a scene. By Yara Tanar, and this lad, whom we don't really know who it is, by Yaged Moshe, by Yomar, tradition says that this is Joshua, this unnamed lad comes over to Moses and says to him, Eldad and Medad, these two people, are mitnaba'im b'machaneh, they are prophesying in the camp, right? Or rather, the Nar comes to Yoshua. So this unnamed anonymous lad comes and says out loud to Moshe, and Joshua, Moshe's number 2, hears this. Vayan Yoshua ben Nun, Misharet Moshe, Moshe's helper, and he says, Adoni Moshe, my master Moshe, destroy these two prophets. Vayomer Moshe, Hamekana Atali, are you jealous for me? Would that everybody was a prophet. That I wish everybody had the Spirit of God on them, right? That would be amazing. Vayasof Moshe, Vayased Moshe el Machaneh, Hu v'Ziknei Yisrael. Now Moses is gathered into the camp, him and all of the elders, and another Spirit of God, Ruach, Nasa Me'ed Adonai, this time a wind, and these salvim, all of a sudden these quails come from the water. Like Tosh al Machneh, and they descend upon the camp, Kederech Yom Ko, like it was a day's journey in both directions. And now there's like 200, or so. There are 200, two cubits deep on the ground, meaning there's like an innumerable amount of meat. And Vayakam Am, and the nation got up all day and all night. And they gather in the Slav, they gather in these quail, right? Even the least of them, Asaf, Asarach, Hamarim, gathered in and slaughtered them, right? And there was so much meat, it was still in their teeth. And they're still have meat in their teeth, and God sends a plague. And at that moment, this became known in verse 34 as a place called the Graves of Desire, Kivrot HaTava, Hisham Kavruv, there they were buried, Et Am Hamit Avim. That's where the people who had been these desiring people were buried. And then the Torah tells us at the end of this very odd chapter, from the place of the Graves of Desire, they then traveled to a place called Chatzerot, to a place called courtyards or enclosures, and that's where they stayed. Okay, children, that's the end of the story. Such a strange story, right?
Right.
So let's look at a couple little pieces before I open this up to see if we can decipher what's going on here. Who are this throng? So Rashi says that the beginning of this story is with the complainers, but then it moves into this throng that are desiring something, right? This desiring throng. They are the Erev Rav, right? This is the group that left Egypt with the Israelites. There's a group called the Erev Rav. We're in source number 2. Who are the Erev Rav, Yosef?
They were Egyptians.
They're the mixed multitude.
mixed
They're people who wanted
multitude,
to be
right.
maybe psycho-Semitic.
Yeah.
They wanted to be part of the Jewish people. They really, belonged. They went with them. And often in rabbinic literature, whenever something negative happens, any characters in the Torah that happen that's a bit negative, right? They'll be kind of will put it onto the refugees.
Yeah.
Put it onto the Asaf Suf, which I think that's happening here with Rashi, but I don't think that's the pshat. I don't think that's really what's happening here. So Rashi then goes on to say, what's the nature of this complaint in source 3, right? Rashi says they didn't have meat. It already said in chapter 12 of Exodus that they left Egypt with a ton of cattle. And it can't be that they ate all of it and now they ran out of it, because when they come into the land, right, they still have that cattle. But Rashi says, quoting the Sifri, which is an early rabbinic commentary, what was happening here? Ela shemivakshim alilah. They were looking for a pretext to fetch, right? They had, in the language of maybe modern psychology, you might say that their backpack was full of grief. Their backpack was full of emotional baggage, and they were looking for some excuse, something to express it, right, in an indirect way, right? We might say that if we were psychodynamically inclined, which I'm sure nobody here is, and our community just doesn't lean in that direction. We might say that this is a story. Chapter 12 begins with a story of people who are, for whatever reasons, traumatized or young or whatever it might be, who can't be direct about what it is. They don't really know what's bothering them, but something's bothering them, and they begin to flail their arms and kick their legs, and everything is annoying. And we see on some level, right? This really a simple reading, I think, is that God and Moshe really don't know what to do with this kvetching. Right, and they respond, unfortunately, to the complaint as it's expressed, and not to the deeper need that's going unmet, which we might say, like someone comes and starts a fight with their partner, and they both know that that's just, and probably sometimes partners say that you're just looking for an excuse to be angry with me, and underneath that is, probably I'm sad, I'm lonely, I don't know how to say that, I miss you, I don't know if I miss you. Like there's a lot of feelings are murky sometimes, and sometimes the simplest energy is the energy of negativity, which expresses discomfort, but not exactly pinpoints the discomfort in a more direct way. What's interesting, I think, and I'm going to open up in a second, is why we went in this direction is because I think the text invites this kind of read, because there's a lot of breast imagery here. There's a lot of mother energy here. When Moshe says to God in the text, did I give birth to this people in verse 12? Look what Ibn Ezra, the great medieval exegete, says. Did I conceive them? Am I their mother? Right? This is the original source of are you my mother? Are you my mother? Am I their mother? Moshe says, am I able to know? Right? I'm not sure if I'm able to discern what their hunger is. They have a hunger, but I might not have the right vessels in order to feed that hunger. And what's fascinating, of course, I think also is that the two characters in the story are prophesizing. They are also riffraff. They are two, according to the tradition, the 70 elders, right? They were supposed to be God said 70, right? But if you have 12 tribes, I think it's like it should be 72. I sort of figured out it should be 72, right? So there are two that are left out. Apparently, according to the tradition, they took lots and to see who would be the elders, and these two cats, Eldad and Medad, are left out. Right? They're the two that didn't make it in. And yet they're the ones that are lifted up at the end of the story as the ones who are, that Moses is saying, I want to include them, right? Why are we excluding these folks? And so the whole chapter begins with people who are complaining, who are having, and then it moves into a group of people who are quote unquote on the outside, who begin a yearning. Maybe the yearning is to be included. Maybe the yearning is to not be asaf suf. They want to be brought in. And then the rest of the chapter talks about gathering in. Like they want to gather in, they want to gather in, they gather in. And then there's this scene where these two left out elders who also receive that prophesizing energy, and their names are cognate with breast. Eldad, Dad is a breast. So Eldad is divine breast. Medad is also, could also be measurement. It could also be whose breast. Like, so there's a vision here of this entire chapter is about nourishment, about who's on, like, how do we include what's on the inside and the outside, or even on the inside, outside of our own desire, our own longings, our own, how do we bury desire? Like, what does that mean? How do we, is desire something that can end, that kind of thing? I want to open it up. I have a couple of chidushim from Chassidus, but I want to hear your voices. But one last little Torah that I thought was adorable, kind of sweet and funny at the same time, just for some humor. When the two, when these two characters were prophesizing, and Joshua says to Moshe, Adoni Moshe Klaim, my master Moshe, can you please destroy them? Rashi, the rabbis say, what does it mean to destroy them? To make an end of them? So Rashi quotes the rabbis who say that the advice to Moshe was to keep them in public service, and that will destroy them. He meant cast upon them the responsibility of public affairs, and they will of themselves soon come to an end to the worry and anxiety that this entails. I thought that was a pretty insightful moment. After so okay, so I'm gonna stay in the room for some voices, and then we're gonna go into the Zoom and hear where this chapter in all of its interesting its flow of ideas and its etymologies and the various where it lands. Okay, so we'll go from Wendy to Thomas to Theo, Tali, and then so Wendy.
This is not the first time that Moses is being told that you can't do this by yourself. He was told by his father-in-law, Yitro, that you can't do this by yourself. You need help. You can't make judgments of everything. So he maybe kind of forgot that, and God is sort of like reiterating what Yitro had told him many chapters ago. You need help. You can't do it alone.
So right. Moshe.
It's the second time he's being told this.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I think that there's something here about, I want to extend what Wendy said in two directions. One is that the word levad, which means to be alone in our tradition, is used around partnership, right? It's not good to be alone. We need partners, romantic partners, but also friends, whatever it's, to be together. And certainly, when Jethro or Yitro comes and says, it's not good for you, Moshe, to be alone, that's the first moment that, and it's the second point, which I think is exactly what I think I'm reading here, which is, Yitro is on the outside looking in, like the riffraff. And the Torah goes out of its way to say that before there was Mount Sinai, there was Mount Yitro. Mount Yitro is the place, the locus of Torah that precedes the divine Torah, because it too is Torah. And then Moshe and the people need to learn Torah from people, quote unquote, who themselves feel like they're on the outside, or that we might have said they're on the outside. Who is this person who's teaching us Torah? We need to learn Torah from all those people. I've said that for so many years, which is also why last week was hurtful for me, also what happened. But we learn from everybody. And here, Moshe has to learn the lesson again from the riffraff, maybe. Like it's the Asaf Suf that are teaching. What triggers all of this teaching for Moshe is that this desire came from the periphery, and it made its way, and it said, this too is learning for you, Moshe. You can't do it alone, and you have to hear that over and over again until it becomes real. And God says, okay, so I'll give you these strong lay leaders. We're going to lift up the community, the next place. So it's really beautiful that you brought that. So Yesher Koach. Thomas.
So riffraff can be thought of to the extent that it's a periphery as another type of enclosure. It's the riffraff at the perimeter, the marginalized, who are actually doing the holding, right? Who are doing the surrounding, literally because they're at the edge. And it's striking that the threat is one of superabundance, immeasurable food, so much that comes, it becomes a nightmare. It is formless. It enters your body and leaves your body like shit, right? But that thread is not delivered on. What's delivered is an abundance of food, but what's important to me, it seems, is that it's very precise. It's very quantified. It's exactly 1 day's journey this way, exactly 1 day's journey that way, and exactly 2 cubits high of mystery dead quails. And the cubit is from the tip of the longest finger to the elbow. It's, comes back to the. So that's a very precise amount. And in precision, there is also enclosure, there is also this sense of the quantifiable, of being held. We think of the divine as infinite, but I think also the capacity for the finite is also divine. And the reason I got there is that riffraff, it seems to me, is also related to this other word in Hebrew that I don't know, hazaroth, enclosures and courtyards. Because those are also the perimeter, those are also the margin, those are also what hold and enclose you. And lastly, because there are psychoanalysts in the room, and I'm sure there are Buddhists in the room, one can't help but think of the hungry ghost. Right? The most difficult incarnation of samsara, it seems to me, the most wretched, the most abject, even though it's allegedly the most mild. You just want to eat. You're so hungry, you can't even be human. And traditionally, and there are of course many esoteric traditions, there are 3 realms. There's the purely formless realm, the thread of the formless infinite. There's the realm of forms, which we are living in, the realm that is held, the realm that is defined, the realm where we have curtains and riffraff to keep us where we are. And then in between is the realm of desire. So you have the formed, formless, and the realm of desire. And that's where the hungry ghosts are trapped. That is the realm into which you are incarnate as a ghost. And so the ghost is a guest, and the guest can be treated like a ghost. Unfortunately, there's a slippage there. So I don't know what all that adds up to. It's just sort of a formless remark about form, but I think it has to do with desire.
Yeah, you're essentially, first of all, beautiful. Second of all, I think that's the image of the mother here, and the mothering is exactly this question of is how much is enough, and how do we measure that? And certainly there's the danger of, the actual Hebrew for the word desire, which appears with this riffraff, is hitavu tava. It doesn't say what they desired, just that they desired. They just desire to desire, right? And it is, right? Desires are endless, and I vow to, right? They're ceaseless, I vow. So there's something profoundly happening in chapter 11 that speaks exactly to everything you just said. And it's a question for us as humans, but certainly in the text where we are in the Torah, is a question of, is it possible if you have a desire that is limitlessly, it's from a place of the hungry ghost, how can anything of form satisfy that? And that's of course the question here. And it's not answered in with precision. It's answered, it's kind of left as a koan. Like, what do we do with that?
What does Hatzerot mean?
Hatzerot means a courtyard. Hatzer, yeah.
I think it's important that it comes to
At the end, and it comes to the courtyard. So maybe like there needs to be a limit on the desire, as it were. We need to like name the desire, right? It's not about the food and just have containment or some version of a boundary. It's a good question, like what, if there is resolution or not in this chapter. But we're gonna hold it there. I know we had 2 more in the room, and then we have Zoomers. So Theo and then Tali, then we'll go to the Zoom. We'll come back to Lori and Alina. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So I guess I have 2 questions that I think relate into one question. And my first question is, why would God do this? But there's an earlier part of the parsha that we didn't read about the Levites and how God raises them up and chooses them as his people. And so I'm curious to ask you, David, I think in some way, to me, the question is like, what does it mean to be chosen, right? Like, why does God choose to act in this, say, aggressive way? And then he chooses the Levites, and, he's choosing us, but he chooses the, like, on some level, it feels like to me, the piece that I don't completely understand is what does God feel that it means to be chosen? And I was curious what you thought about that. Just a simple question.
Yeah, I don't know what it means to God to be chosen. If you mean, it's interesting at what level you're asking the question. Like, what does the Torah say that God, what do I say, what does the tradition say? There are a lot of different.
Like a combination, maybe. Like,
well, I mean, certainly to be chosen in the Torah is to have expectations placed upon you and responsibilities. It means to be designated, to stand out from the formless into the form and have a particular expression. To be chosen is to be in a unique relationship, right? And so, the Jewish people are chosen for something, to do something. The Levites are chosen to do something specifically in the temple precinct, and so is Aaron and Moses, and each one has a particular job, a particular expectation, kind of a job, responsibilities and assumptions. God's personality in the Torah is a very complicated personality. God, as God appears in the Torah, is not the same God as the God that appears in the Middle Ages and the God that appears in the Lurianic Kabbalah and the God of Hasidim. And I certainly think that we take God's emotional life in the Torah with great humility. Like, we don't really understand. But I think it has a value, though, because it says something about disappointment, and what disappoints the divine might be also unskillful behavior, right? That we might translate at different levels. Like, so for people to be complaining about, for people to be who are privileged enough to have left Egypt to continue to whine about Egypt, right? On some level, we might say, well, that might not be the most skillful thing to do, is to get angry at them, right? And so that would be true enough from what we know now. But we might just say that there is a response to that is a kind of disappointment. And then there are skillful means that we might employ to work with that, right? So it's a kind of signaling that this is a moment that is not the most skillful moment. But like, I wouldn't translate it as anger any more than I would translate an earthquake as God's anger, because that's just not my theology.
Okay.
Theo.
Do you think that it points to an imperfection in God, or it's about wanting us to have these kind of conversations?
I think it doesn't point to an imperfection in God any more than I think that human beings can accurately describe the divine. I think it's an imperfection in our conception of the divine as it was codified at that moment in history. I think that theology, like all things, evolve. And the Torah is very young in certain places and very old in other places. The Torah is kind of a mixed strata of very of developmental stages. Some of it is from the world beyond, some of it's from a very young place in human history, and it mixes together, and it asks us to understand it, and to bring it forward. I think that's our partnership with the Torah. I think we do a great service to the Torah when we refuse to accept some of its theology and demand that it grow up, which I think is another way of seeing the very respectful dialogue that we have with Torah. So I'm going to go to Tali, but thank you for your very deep and question. Yeah, Tali.
So actually, when we began, I was thinking of Yitro, but what I was also feeling with Moshe, if we go back when God asked him to speak to Pharaoh, he felt that he had the lack of speech. And here it's like he's like speaking, coming from a place of really despair, and I think almost depression, that I can't do this. It's the first time I think really see Moses, like Job, were in this really place of, I'm so alone here, but yet he's not. He considers he's been in relationship with God, but this loneliness that I can't do this. And then I love that you added at the end from Eldad Meldad, you say breath, and I think about no one's breathing. Moshe's not breathing. The the people
Yeah.
are not breathing.
Yeah.
So it's all tied into the inability to, often it's the reptilian part of one's brain,
Right.
to be able to.
Well, that comes back a little bit to what Thomas was saying about the body. I think he said it so beautifully that the body, like the irony, of course, is that the body here, like they're eating until it comes in and out of the body, like the boundaries. And so breath also is another moment of that movement between inside and outside, between the bound and the unbound. And so I really, really beautiful. I think that the despair of Moshe is tangible. And I think on some level we might say something positive about the divine here in this chapter is that God responds to Moshe's despair, not by punishing him, but by getting him the support he needs. Like, Moshe says, I'm all alone, right? And I need help. I can't do this myself. And then God said,
So he's mothering.
Moshe gets mothered by God. God says, great, let me give you some help, right? Let me give you some help. And then what's remarkable is that once Moshe has support, he's not jealous. There's no threat to his leadership, and nothing that shows up is threatening to him. These two prophesizing individuals, he's like, you know what? I'm boundless, right? Now Moshe says, my energy, would that there were an infinite number of prophets, another expression of that formlessness, right? Like, there doesn't need to be one prophet. Let there be, would that everyone was a prophet. That would be amazing.
And it's
I think a
also,
lot of leaders would say that they would prefer not to have everybody have that power and an authority in this kind of a big moment. I have to stop you. I know
Just
you're
want to
no,
be
I have to because they're for the people and we
Okay.
gotta have boundaries.
Okay.
So please, everybody. So Ilana, Jay, Beth, and an unnamed Zoom user. So go ahead, Ilana. Thank you, Tali. I appreciate you.
Boker Tov. So I'm thinking again about this theme of hunger and desire and suckling, that initially manna is concretized, and that there's kind of an enchantment that occurs, and then there's a shift. I'm losing my focus here. That then what is the nature of what? I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Why don't you go to somebody else and I'll regain it?
Okay, we'll come back to you. Okay, I can't wait. Jay, go ahead.
Shabbat Shalom. Since so much of the shiur seems to hang on the riffraff and being outside, I'm a little puzzled about something. So please, maybe you can explain it to me and bear with me for a minute. The riffraff are not introduced till verse 4. In verse 1 through 3, everyone is complaining. It seems to be some kind of general complaint, but it's enough that it angers God, and that typical flaring nose thing, which is interesting since later the meat is coming out of their noses, to the point where God sends a fire that eats, which I think is interesting. Everyone? No, not everyone. Those who are at the outskirts of the machaneh. Now, who are at the outskirts of the machaneh typically? The riffraff. And so then it's only after that in verse 4 that the riffraff are introduced with a more specific complaint about the food. I'm wondering what to do with that. Is that partly also why only the edges of the camp? So are the riffraff scapegoating, and is part of their complaining because they are in fact singled out for punishment to something that everyone does? I'm puzzled.
Yeah, so there's one source that says that the word edge of the camp, the Sifri says Baktsinim shebemachaneh. It starts with the Kitzinim, actually. It's not the riffraff in the beginning. It's actually the most elevated, the Kitzinim, like the officers, like the highest level. Now it says it's Bakseh, but it's at the edge of the camp, but it doesn't tell us actually that that's where it begins. Like it doesn't say that the burning, right, happens in the edge of the camp, but that's where the fire happens, right? So there's one tradition that says that everybody had a yearning, but because it was suppressed by the Kitzinim, right, it expresses itself in the margins. Another way of saying that would be that the margins, the Asaf Suf, represent the shadow of the collective, that which was unable to be expressed at some point, right, in the very opening becomes expressed more explicitly, right, and overtly in the Asaf Suf. And in fact, there was another tradition that says that what happens in the beginning, in the burning, is that it doesn't express itself outwardly. They're kimit oninim, Ra, Oznei Adonai, only God could hear it. They hadn't yet verbalized it. And then when we arrive at the Asaf Suf in verse 4, that's the beginning of the externalization of something. So we might say that like what was fantasized about in the beginning becomes verbalized in the middle. And in that sense, like we have another conversation about those things which no one wants to talk about or know, as Rabbi I think Kolaressa spoke about this last night. I didn't hear it, but we worked on it. Like there are things that are the unknown known, right? Or the unexpressed known would be the beginning. And then that becomes the spoken known in the middle. And then the integrated known towards the end in some way. That's kind of like, again, a reading of this. But I think that the traditional reading of this is at odds with the way that we're reading it, just so that we're clear. Like, or there's a, like, the typical way of reading chapter 11 is, oh, here they go again, the kvetchers, right? And the kvetchers and the riffraff always started, it's always about those people on the margins. But I think the way that we're reading here is very consonant with the way that the Hasidic masters read this, which is very similar to what Tomas and Tali and like all of these Torahs are very similar to that reading. So I hope that helps a little bit.
So in that concept, can verse 1 to 3 be a question of what makes catharsis possible?
Yeah, that would be a beautiful way of saying it. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know why David's hand, I see David, or maybe he's the unknown user. Okay, Beth and then David. Go Beth and then David. Okay.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
I'm struck by the way in which the people seem to collectively represent a child in this parsha. They start out grieving, later they're weeping, they're whining, and it's almost as if the people are having a collective temper tantrum the way a toddler would. And we all were toddlers once, and some of us have had toddlers, and there's a way in which little kids stamp their feet and say no, no, no to everything, and they don't even know what they want. All they know is they're mad, they're frustrated, they're hungry, maybe their diaper's wet. Anyway, there's some problem, and they may just have decided to be mad about things. And there's a way in which both Moshe and God are showing up as really frustrated, exhausted, unskillful parents in this parsha, that they're reacting very negatively to this temper tantrum. They're not able to just embrace the people and say, okay, sweetheart, it's gonna be okay. You know, we'll get you your bottle, we'll get you your binky, we'll get you your blankie, and you'll be okay. Instead, God flares out. In this parsha, God reminds me so much of when my dad would get all PO'd and frustrated when my brothers and I were little, just exploding with anger because he couldn't take it anymore. And that's kind of what this scenario reminds me of. DeBarty.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to read this chapter without the eyes of kind of modern psychological insights about what is the most skillful way to parent people, parent children. I just want to add one piece to what Beth said, and it's a very beautiful teaching from the Mei HaShiloach, which you don't have. It's inside, but I'll say it outside. The Mei HaShiloach says that in the beginning, as Jay pointed out, the first verses. Where their people are as if they're grieving. It doesn't say that what was said by them was heard by anyone other than by God. And the Mei HaShiloach says, the Ishbitzer Rebbe says, that really what was happening is that they were sad. And the reason why it doesn't say that anyone else heard it, but just God, is that there would have been no way for the Torah to write that another human being heard this sadness and criticized them. He says, because this world, it's because this world requires sadness, or it invites sadness. No person could hear another person's sadness and think, "Oh, really? That sadness is this world is that makes no sense." It makes sense, he says. That's why I said that God heard it and God was upset. Now, back to what Beth was saying, I think again, I totally agree with you, and I think everybody here, we're all kind of like anachronistically reading back into this saying, wow, this is not a manual for great parenting or skillful management, right? On the other hand, I wonder if we who are sit in judgment of the God and the Moses of this chapter also would say the same thing about, let's say, if we heard powerful politicians whining, right? People with tremendous privilege who showed up and say, like, imagine getting watching a Real Housewives. I don't know, what isn't that like a real reality show? And you see people who live in huge homes stretching. I'm sure there's a part of us that's not so skillful that would say, really, come on. And we imagine these people as children like those 4 Colombian children that were found in the Amazon after we're talking about people who are having a direct connection with God. You have to remember the context. God is literally showing up in like, if we follow this literally, because that's what we're doing, we're reading it literally, saying, God's like, I just came down in a cloud. What is going on? Like, I'm giving you manna. It can taste like anything you want, and and you're complaining about melons. So I think that on some level we have to stay consistent with our, like, on the one hand, we drop out of the literalism of the text when we ask it to be more like, like a very modern understanding of parenting, but we forget that like what's really happening is a group of adults who have resources, who are fetching. Again, I'm not advocating that you should show up in the house of a mourner or anything and say to them, come on, the world's a beautiful place, come on, God forbid. But I like to hold both of those, even as Beth's point is salient and on point. So we're going to go to David and then Ilana, and then we'll come back into the room quickly. I know. Go, David, and then Ilana.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm on a different device, so I'm an anonymous Zoom user.
Sure.
I'm always intimidated with after going after someone like Thomas, but it follows very beautifully after what Beth was saying, and it's perhaps I want to go in a different direction because perhaps I am an elder now that I can really relate to this. Yitro was an elder. We've seen this whole elder scene before. We saw it at Mount Sinai. The elders tried to stop the golden calf. And what happened? They were killed. We need elders in our society. We need that wisdom. We need that advice. And just to be real brief with it, it's particularly pertinent at this particular time. It always blows my mind that like all the young people love Bernie Sanders, for example. This wisdom coming down, and here we have this elder president. And thank God, in my opinion, that we have this kind of wisdom. And I just think that, I just want to introduce the idea of that we're too easy to dismiss the elders and the wisdom in our society, and we need them. And that's to me a lot what this lesson is of this portion.
Shamati, beautiful. Bringing it to the elders. I know. Bring it to the elders. We're gonna go to Ilana because Ilana, we're just finishing the 4 people that we had up originally. Go ahead, Ilana.
Okay, thank you for your patience. I'm thinking about how we all begin with this hunger. The people begin with this hunger, and then the people and there's manna. There's this food that comes from divinity, and a segment of the people get concretized in their hunger, and the 70 move from that kind of concretized hunger to a different sort of manna, which is this divine relationship. And it's and I'm just really struck with the contrast that there's a receiving that gets concretized initially, and then there's a receiving that is full of wonder, that permeates and changes each human being, but it is also a form of manna.
Yes.
Beautiful.
I'm so happy we waited for that.
Very beautiful.
That was very beautiful and worth it. And yeah, there's a lot there in that last piece. I can even imagine you're writing a poem about that or something that feels very true to the kind of trajectory as Thomas was also describing it from a Buddhist and from a spiritual perspective, the inner intelligence. It's 9:45. There are three people whose hands are up. I'm going to start with our elders. I'll start with Batya, and be brief if you can. Batya, Lori, and then Stu. Just really brief. Go ahead, Batya.
So I'm struck with what it means to be chosen. I'm choosing you, giving you an example. If you don't accept what I give you, being something that you need, and then you will suffer. You will suffer throughout your life. So learn it quickly. Accept what I give you that you need. You know, good morning blessing.
Shesali Kol Tzarchi.
Tzarchi.
Yeah.
And so
this is a story of people being told by God, I'm giving you what you need, and God saying to them, accept it and be
give you mana.
and be satisfied
Right
and be
now,
happy.
you know, this is what
right.
you need. And so it's about faith,
Faith.
you know,
Right.
that
Absolutely.
we have to have faith that it will, if I keep working, then I'll hear again what I heard before, that Hashem has come to me. There's a portion in there also. So maybe I'll hear that again. And so this is what I'm getting from all of this.
So the word for a suckle servant, or someone who is the one who's I guess nursing, a nursemaid, a wet nurse is omen, aleph mem nun, which is from the same root as emunah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Neat.
Wow.
Right, to be able to hear amen is to hear omen. It's really omen is, and amen also is. I have faith in what you just said. I affirm it. So it's very beautiful.
Yeah.
This is certainly about faith. Lori and the Stewarts.
I want to stitch what Thomas said with what's been said, which is when we come onto the planet the first time, we're a child. And the process of individuation and healing means that we have to go through all these states of consciousness, of being angry. And as one who treats trauma, a lot of people come in and they're just analyzing emotions.
Right.
And it's like when you start to feel the emotions and you metabolize it, then you can start to open up to Yud He Vav He.
Right.
So evolution means that we have to, as a species, go through all these developmental stages.
Beautiful.
But when I arrive as the adult and I'm sitting there, then I can love you no matter what emotion you have. And that's the maturity that's missing on the planet right now.
Thank you. Stewart.
And I just piggyback on this.
You guys piggyback well together.
What I wanted to connect with is that as I sit with this sense that everybody is whining and craving, and we can judge it, but if we look at it as just the experience, what is that felt sense experience of this desire and pain that these people are experiencing? It's complaining, as you said, about this superficial thing, but there's a deeper pain that's not being connected to. Right. And what do we need? We need a nurturing container in order to process, to really go in, to grieve together. Now, do we grieve together as a group? Do we grieve alone? It's so much better when we can hold each other and grieve together. One more thing, I see the 70 goes to 72, which is interesting that you need the other two to create the 72 names of God.
Yes.
Well, what's beautiful about a courtyard is that it's infinite in one axis, it's no roof, right to heaven, but finite in the other axis.
So that's the soul's connection to Hashem.
Exactly.
That we have our human part, but there's also the
obviously the open book is also open. It has an axis that we have boundaries around time, but it's open in terms of the beauty of it.
One question. What do you think they're sad about? You said Hashem heard the sadness.
Yeah, I think that they're sad. Well, I'll finish with this story from the Moor Shemesh, who was the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, and in his name, like some tikkun for sadness and tikkun for things that need to be healed. The Moor Shemesh's take on this, which is the last source only for those. I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to translate the whole thing. It's very long, and I just put it here in case anybody would want to break their teeth on it. But whatever, it needs to be translated. He has this very beautiful text, and I'm not going to say it inside, I'll tell you outside, the beginning of it. The way that this Columbus Common Ekstein, the way the Moor Shemesh reads this is that if people had a desire and the desire and the sadness are mixed together. It's a kind of sadness about what it is to be in the world and to be a broken person in the world. And they brought it to Moshe, and Moshe said, how can I help them? Because I'm not the kind of leader who has the kind of broken pieces that they need healing. They need leaders who are themselves broken like them and they can relate to. And that, and so I think that either way, whatever they were sad about, it could be a million things that they were sad about. It could be that they were sad because of, of being in no man's land. They didn't know where they were going. They could have been sad because life itself is sad. As Mishpitzer said, they could be sad because of loss. But what they needed were leaders who, in his rendering, is that they needed leaders who, unlike Moshe, even though it's funny because Moshe is of course very flawed in the Torah, but in the mind of this Hasidic master, Moshe is on a level that these people can relate to, was inaccessible. And the 70 elders then came in, the 70 or the 72 elders became proxies for the people that when they showed them the way that they themselves were working on themselves and they were trying their best to work with their sadness and work with their healing, like the wounded healer became a helpful surrogate parent, as it were, to show them the way to healing, which was to be very vulnerable and human and exposed. So I don't know exactly what they were sad about, but in this rendering of the Hasidic master, it's like if there are leaders and models for what it is to be able to hold our sadness and have a container and to still be logged on to the divine without the roof. So I said this, before people walked in, and I'm certainly, I'm not one of the 70 elders, but I certainly am a flawed leader on so many levels, and I've always led Romemu. As you know, from this past week, I said last Shabbos that we were gonna take in we really wanted to take some time in the coming month in July and not have services so that we could restore and replenish and rejuvenate ourselves. And we heard from the community that the community said, we'll be like we need Romemu every Shabbos. So we changed course. We sent out an email yesterday. We said we made a mistake, and we heard you, and it's great. And I said that I wasn't in Romemu last night because I was blessed to be a part of long-standing members of our community had their son getting married, early, like right before Shabbos, an hour before Shabbos, and so I went there to do the wedding. And this is the first time this ever happened to me in my whole life. I was under the chuppah and I turned to take the glasses of wine, and I had forgotten to uncork the bottle of wine and to pour the wine into the glasses. So no big deal. I went to take out the cork, and what happened when I went to take the cork out? It broke. It just broke completely. Just standing there with a bottle of wine that I could not get open, and 400 people waiting for me. So it was a perfect example of like, okay, so it happens. Like it's not anyone's fault. I mean, partially my fault. I should have taken out the cork earlier, but it happens. I was whenever things happen, I forgot. So it's okay. Like we said, everybody was like took a deep breath. And and someone went to get a bottle of wine, and we sang while it was happening, and I gave over, I said some words, and we moved forward.
Amen.
And I said, that's what happens at the end of the chuppah. We break a glass because there's all kinds of things that will happen in life, including breaking. And what's most important is after that happens, right? That's the most important thing, right? Because if you end the wedding without breaking the glass, it's just not it's not real. Right? The wedding is not your life. The wedding is just like a moment. The next moment, there'll be things that you have to deal with, and surprises will come, and leaders who are aloof from that, or people who are aloof from that, parents who are aloof from that, are not able to adjust and adapt in that moment, right? Adaptive leadership is much, much better than being like the well PhD'd, and like you have to be adaptive, because life will be that way. And the more of Shemesh is saying that whatever their sadness was, Moshe, for some reason in this moment, could not relate to it. Or it could be the mother or the father or the caregiver who in that moment needed to go take a time out themselves. They could go become and be more present in that moment and show up. And I think it was a great teaching for me last night. And I learn all the time from my mistakes. I try. And I think I love the way to end this chapter 11. It's like a weird chapter, but ultimately it's about the faith that we can show up even when things get difficult. And as long as we have our people with us, because I get by with a little help from my friends, right? That's what happens. We need our friends. So Shem should bless all of us with all of these teachings and anything else that we needed to gain from this morning. May we gathered in, and may our hungers be met in the right level at which they appear in our consciousness. Amen. Yesher koach to everybody. Yesher koach as well. Eden, thank you for your moderation. And Shabbos, everybody. Shabbos.
Shabbos, everyone.
Shabbos.
Yeah, sure.
Good Shabbos, Rabbi. Good Shabbos, everyone. Okay. I thought that was a great one. Right? Hello. I have a